Why do you keep tripping yourself up just when you're about to make real progress? Why do you start something with passion, intensity, and vision, only to slowly, or sometimes suddenly, pull away from it? It's not because you're lazy, it's not because you're unmotivated, it's something deeper, quieter, and more hidden. Something within you is fighting you, and that something is you, the part of you that you don't see, the part that Carl Jung referred to as the shadow, the unconscious aspects of your personality that you've rejected, ignored, or never even acknowledged. You sabotage yourself because parts of your psyche are at war, and until you face those hidden forces, you'll keep watching your own hands undo everything you try to build. This isn't about willpower. It's not about routines, calendars, or discipline hacks. You can try all of those and still find yourself circling the same problems. You'll wake up on fire for change and then waste hours on distractions. You'll push forward only to stop just short of a breakthrough. You'll self-destruct in relationships, procrastinate on dreams, and run from opportunities, not because you're incapable, but because your shadow is still calling the shots behind the scenes. That's what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Think about that. Really sit with it. You'll call it fate. You'll think, "It's just the way I am," or "Bad things always happen to me," or "Nothing ever works out." But what if none of that is true? What if the real issue is that there's a scared, angry, wounded version of you operating under the surface, doing everything it can to protect you, even if that means destroying your progress? Your shadow doesn't hate you. It just doesn't trust your conscious goals. It doesn't believe you're safe. It doesn't believe you're enough. It doesn't believe you're worthy of success, love, or peace. And so it pulls you back. Not because it wants you to fail, but because it learned a long time ago that failing felt safer than trying. Maybe you grew up in an environment where expressing yourself got you punished. Maybe being ambitious made people mock you. Maybe you once reached for something great, got your hopes up, and watched it all fall apart. And now, without realizing it, you sabotage anything that feels too good, too real, too possible. You tell yourself you're scared of failure, but what if you're just as scared of success? Because if you succeed, you'll have to leave your old self behind. You'll have to become someone new, and for the shadow, change is death. The shadow is formed when parts of us are rejected. Maybe you were told to be tough, so your sensitive side went underground. Maybe you were told to be obedient, so your rebellious energy became shameful. Maybe you were praised for being smart, so your fear of looking dumb got buried but never disappeared. These disowned parts don't go away, they wait, and when you push towards something bold and meaningful, they rise, they whisper doubts, they trigger self-doubt, they quietly undo your efforts, and unless you recognize them, they win. The hard truth is this: you can't outwork your shadow. You can't outrun it. It's not a flaw in your habits, it's a fracture in your identity, and the only way through is by facing it. That means noticing the patterns you've ignored. That means asking yourself hard questions. Why do I always quit when things start going well? Why do I stay in relationships that drain me? Why do I chase goals that don't really mean anything to me? Why do I fear being seen, even when I say I want recognition? These are not surface-level problems. They are signs that there is a part of you operating with a different agenda. Jung didn't invent the idea of the shadow because he was trying to be poetic. He discovered it by working with people whose lives were shaped by forces they didn't understand. People who said one thing but did another. People who couldn't seem to stop sabotaging the very things they claimed to want. He realized that until they confronted the rejected parts of themselves, they were doomed to keep repeating the same self-defeating cycles. You're not any different. You may be more aware, more informed, more self-reflective, but until you've made peace with your shadow, your actions will never fully align with your intentions. Think of your shadow like an old friend you've lost touch with. You don't hate them. You just forgot they mattered. But they didn't forget you. They remember the hurt. They remember the fear. They remember every moment you said, not now, or that's not me, or I can't deal with this. And now they're still knocking, waiting, desperate to be seen, not to ruin your life, but to rejoin it. Because integration, not suppression, is the path forward. You have to bring the unconscious into the light, not by fighting it, but by listening to it, by honoring it, by letting it speak. This isn't easy. It takes courage to admit you're not fully in control. It takes humility to realize you've been the one holding yourself back. It takes compassion to embrace the parts of yourself you've been ashamed of. But that's where freedom lives. That's where real growth begins. Not when you add more tools to your toolbox, but when you stop pretending those old wounds don't affect you. When you stop acting like your shadow isn't real. When you start seeing that your self-sabotage isn't a weakness, it's a message. Every time you pull away from progress, your shadow is speaking. Every time you make excuses, get lost in distractions, or numb out, it's trying to tell you something. And that message is simple. I'm still here. The fear, the pain, the anger, the doubt, it hasn't left. You've just gotten better at pretending it's not there. But pretending doesn't make it go away. It just makes it louder, and eventually it drowns out everything else. That's when you feel stuck. That's when you feel lost. That's when you feel like you're your own worst enemy, because you are. Not by choice, but by unconscious design. But what if that didn't have to be your story anymore? What if instead of running, you turned around? What if you looked at the parts of yourself that you've spent years avoiding, and instead of judging them, you got curious? Why am I afraid of being seen? Why do I associate effort with pain? Why do I need everything to be perfect before I start? Why do I cling to failure like it's familiar? These aren't flaws, they're clues. Clues pointing to your past, clues pointing to your conditioning, clues pointing to the shadow. And once you start listening, everything changes. You start to see that your triggers aren't random, they're echoes of unhealed wounds. You begin to notice when your energy drops, when your motivation disappears, when your self-talk turns toxic, and instead of pushing harder, you ask, what's really going on here? That's awareness, that's growth, that's how the unconscious starts to become conscious. And when that happens, the sabotage slows. It doesn't disappear overnight, but it loses its grip. You start making decisions that align with your deeper truth. You start taking action even when your shadow tries to pull you back. You start showing up with integrity, not just discipline. And most of all, you start trusting yourself, not because you're perfect, but because you're whole. Because you've made room for every part of you, not just the shiny parts. Because you've stopped waging war against yourself. You've stopped exiling pieces of your soul. You've chosen integration over image. And that is what sets you free. You don't need another motivational boost. You don't need another productivity hack. What you need is to sit with yourself honestly, bravely, and ask, what am I afraid of? Then go deeper. What part of me am I rejecting? And deeper still, what would happen if I love that part instead? That's not weakness, that's power, that's transformation, and it's the only way to truly stop sabotaging yourself. Because in the end, self-sabotage is not the enemy, it's a signal, a flare shot up from your unconscious saying, something here needs your attention. The question is, will you listen? Or will you keep repeating the same cycles, calling it fate, wondering why nothing ever changes? Jung gave us the map, but the journey is yours. The moment you stop running and start listening is the moment everything starts to shift. And when that moment comes, you'll finally understand the enemy was never your ambition. The enemy was never your dreams. The enemy was never you. It was the unloved, unseen, unheard part of you begging to be brought home. So bring it home, not tomorrow, not when you feel more ready, now. Because your life, your real life, starts when your shadow stops being your saboteur and becomes your ally.